It was supposed to be a quiet political discussion on an international round broadcast live from New York. The host was relaxed. The guests were high profile. Then US Attorney Alina Habba, sleek in her blue blazer, leaned forward with a smirk and said it. The thing about African countries is they're not really ready for democracy. I mean, let's be honest, most of them don't even understand what freedom really means. There was a brief silence, a few fake chuckles. Then came Captain Ibrahim Traore, dialed in remotely from Burkina Faso, seated with quiet dignity in a modest government office. His eyes didn't flinch. His fingers tapped slowly on the table. He didn't interrupt, but something about his stillness was louder than words. The room got colder. The host quickly tried to move on, but the internet didn't. By nightfall, clips of Habba's comment had gone viral across the African continent. People were hurt, some were enraged, and others were simply tired of being talked down to, tired of the ignorance. But no one expected what Ibrahim would say the next day, and when he spoke, it shook the world. Traore sat alone in his office well past midnight. His aides had gone home, the lights were dim, his face was tense. He'd watched the clip a dozen times. They don't even understand what freedom really means. The words played over and over. Suddenly, a call came in from his mother. She rarely called this late. He picked up Ibrahim. Her voice trembled softly. "They're laughing at us again. Like we're children, like we're animals." She paused. "Do you remember what your father died fighting for?" Traore didn't speak. His throat tightened. "They don't know what Africa is. You do." He closed his eyes. Flashes of dusty villages, empty classrooms, droughts, laughter, children running barefoot through fields, men who gave their last meal to a neighbor. He wasn't angry. He was heartbroken. It wasn't about Habba. It was about everything her comment represented. He looked out the window, the dark sky above Ouagadougou. A storm was building, but it wasn't outside. It was inside of him. "I will answer, Mama," he whispered, and what he said the next morning would pierce through the heart of every African watching. The next morning, global networks tuned in again. No one expected him to reply, but he showed up. Traore appeared, calm and clear-eyed, seated behind the same desk. No suit, no armor, just his simple green military shirt, unbuttoned at the top. He didn't raise his voice. "Madame Habba," he began softly, "you said Africa doesn't understand freedom. But let me tell you something about freedom." He paused. "Freedom is a mother walking 10 kilometers every day just to fetch clean water for her children. That is freedom. Freedom is a farmer who refuses to sell his land even when the world offers him millions because his father is buried there. Freedom is a village defending itself with nothing but songs and courage when no one else comes to help. Africa doesn't understand freedom." He leaned forward. "We've lived without food, without electricity, without weapons, but we've never lived without dignity." The room was silent. Somewhere in Lagos, an old man wiped tears from his eyes. In Nairobi, a teacher replayed the clip. 5 times before school, in South Africa, children stood taller that day. Africa had just spoken, and the world could no longer look away. In a small village in northern Ghana, 9-year-old Eli sat cross-legged on the cracked floor of his grandmother's hut. The black and WHITE TV flickered as Traore's speech echoed through the room. He didn't understand all the words, but he understood the feeling. We have never lived without dignity. Eli looked up at his grandmother. Tears were streaming down her face. "Why are you crying, Nana?" "Because," she whispered, "we've waited too long." To hear someone say that for us, Eli had grown up watching his father carry sacks of cassava barefoot. He had seen his mother give up her food just so he and his sister could eat, but they never begged, they never bowed. Now a man on TV, a man with a voice calm like a father's, was telling the world, Africa is not weak. In that moment, Eli didn't feel poor. He didn't feel forgotten. He felt seen. Across the continent, similar moments were happening. In dusty homes, in schoolyards, in refugee camps, the world saw a political statement. But Africans saw something. Else they saw a mirror, and for the first time, they liked what they saw. Back in Washington, D.C., the African Union building was boosted. Phones rang nonstop. Journalists flooded inboxes. News anchors scrambled for translations of Traore's speech. Inside the US State Department, Alina Habba's office was locked. Sources said she hadn't left the building since the backlash began. Online, hashtags like China Africa deserves respect and China Traore voice trended globally. Even black communities in the US rallied behind him, hosting Twitter spaces titled, "Finally, a leader who said it." But behind the scenes, things were tense. A leaked memo revealed that several African embassies had filed formal complaints. One even demanded a public apology. Alina sat frozen in her chair, her confident smile long gone. She played Traore's words. "Again, we've lived without food, without electricity, without weapons, but we've never lived without dignity." His voice was calm, but it burned. What she thought would be a forgettable comment had become an international fire. And yet, the man who started it all wasn't basking in attention. Captain Traore had disappeared from the media. No interviews, no posts, just silence. Where was he? Why had he gone quiet? And what would happen when he finally spoke again? Days passed. Then came the letter. It was handwritten in broken French, mailed from a village in Mali. The handwriting shook with age, but the words were clear. "My name is Amin. I am the widow of Boubacar Dio, who died in 1993 fighting rebels with only a rusted rifle. He was shot twice but refused to retreat. Before he died, he whispered Tome, 'Don't let them forget us.' Captain Traore, I thought the world forgot, but when I saw your face on the news, I felt like my husband was alive again. Thank you for not letting them forget." The letter reached Traore's office just before dawn. He didn't speak as he read it. He just folded it, placed it inside his uniform jacket, and stared out the window. He wasn't a man who cried easily, not when his comrades were killed, not when his country was mocked, but that morning he cried, silent libus, he knew he wasn't just speaking for today. He was speaking for every voice that history buried, and the world was finally listening. In a dusty refugee camp near the Burkina Faso border, 12-year-old Mayam sat beside a torn UN tent. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, not because there wasn't food, but because she'd lost her will to hope. She had watched her father die during a militia raid. Her school was turned into a rebel outpost. Her little brother still screamed at night. That morning, a woman named AA, the camp volunteer, gently placed a phone near Mariam and whispered, "Watch this." It was a clip of Captain Traore's speech, his voice soft, his face steady. "We are not a broken people. We are a rising people." Something happened in Mayam's chest. Her lip trembled. Her eyes widened. She stared longer than she had stared at anything in weeks. After the video, she whispered her first full sentence in days. "He's like my papa. He looks like my papa." That evening, miyamate, not much, but enough to keep breathing. In that one moment, Traore had done more than speak. He gave a starving girl her first reason to live. And in the silence of that camp, the spirit of Africa had stirred once more. After nearly a week of silence, Traore finally agreed to speak again. Not to a Western network, not in a gold-trimmed room. He chose a local Birkin Bay TV station, one with an old desk, flickering lights, and a crackling mic. And yet, within 4 hours, it was the most viewed interview across Africa. He didn't shout. He didn't blame Africa as not asking for pity. He said, "We are asking for respect." He held up a photo of a farmer in the Sahel who rebuilt his home with mud after floods destroyed it 3 times. This man never made the news, but he's what Africa looks like. He spoke of nurses who walk for miles to reach patients, teachers who haven't been paid in 6 months but still show up, grandmothers raising 5 orphans with their bare hands. And finally, we are not poor. We are not backward. We are not a people in need of saving. The world leaned in, and for the first time in decades, Africa wasn't a headline of disaster. Africa was a voice of truth. Backstage, at the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa, cameras were being set up for a televised panel. Dozens of presidents and foreign ministers adjusted their suits and scarves, but one man, the president of Sierra Leone, known for rarely showing emotion, stood still, wiping his face with a white cloth. An aide leaned in. "Are you all right, sir?" He nodded slowly. "I watched Traore's full speech last night," he whispered 3 times. "I cried like a child, not because I was sad, but because someone finally spoke for us." He wasn't alone. By morning, 7 other African leaders had issued joint support statements, calling for an annual Day of African Dignity inspired by Traore's words. At the summit, Traore walked in without bodyguards, without 80, just his calm, steady walk and humble eyes. As he took his seat, dozens stood to clap, not because protocol required it, not because the cameras were rolling, but because they felt it in their bones. That was their school. No roof, no walls, just dusty notebooks and hope. Their teacher, Mr. Musa, once had the chance to leave for France, but he stayed, saying, "If ego, who will teach them how to stay proud?" A young boy, Idrissa, slowly raised his hand. "Sir, does this mean we matter too?" Musa's throat tightened. He nodded. In that broken village, without a roof, the children sang the national anthem louder than ever, because for the first time they were seen and for the first time they felt like the future. Many African states still lack the structures to handle basic governance. He just said, "Even a tree doesn't mock a seed it doesn't understand." And then he spoke about African resilience, the burden of colonization, and the stolen years. Now watching, alone in her penthouse, something cracked inside Alina. Not pride, not anger, guilt. For years, she had seen Africa as numbers, as failed states, as places she read about, never knew. She paused the video, rewound it, watched again, and then she picked up her phone. She sent a message to her team. "I need to speak with him directly, not as an attorney, as a human being." The woman who once looked down was now looking up at the strength she had never dared to see. He held a worn-out Burkina Faso flag. It was bigger than his body, and it dragged across the ground as he walked. Reporters rushed over. "Why are you here, little man?" one asked. The boy looked up, cheeks dusty, voice soft. "My papa died in the mines." He said, "One day we'll have a leader who loves us. I think it's now." There was silence. A camera captured the moment. That single clip of the boy, eyes hopeful, flag trailing, went viral across the continent. Millions shared it. They called him the child of the revolution. That night, Traore saw the clip too. He stood still for a long moment and then quietly said to his aide, "We have to build something at last for that boy, for all of them." In that moment, the movement stopped being about politics. Far away from the buzzing capitals and flashing cameras, in a small village tucked between dusty roads and cracked earth, life moved slowly. A grandmother, Nana Owa, sat outside her clay house, knitting a faded scarf. She had lost her husband and 3 sons to wars no one cared about. News from the outside world rarely reached here, but this day was different. A young man, fresh from the city, played Traore's speech on a cracked radio. Nana Owa closed her eyes, hearing a voice that spoke with respect, hope, and pride. Her weathered hands stopped knitting. Tears slipped quietly down her cheek. For decades, she had prayed for someone to speak for her lost sons, for her broken family. Now, with every word, Africa is not weak. She felt something long buried, a spark, a promise. Thousands of miles away, in a small apartment in Washington, D.C., a young African-American student named Jamal sat reading a letter from his mother. She wrote about the struggles back home in Ghana, lack of clean water, the rising cost of food, and the feeling of being ignored by the world. But Jamal's phone buzzed with notifications, millions sharing Traore's speech, paced his room, then wrote a post on social media. "This man, Captain, we are more than stories of struggle, we are stories of strength." His post went viral, and as messages flooded in from Africans and African descendants worldwide, Jamal realized that this was not just politics. It was a movement rekindling hope across oceans. The day after Traore's response, the international press, reporters who usually sought controversy were left speechless by the depth of his words. Instead, they aired stories about African doctors fighting pandemics, young inventors, creating solar power solutions, and communities rebuilding after floods. In a press room in Paris, a journalist whispered to her colleague, "He's changed the story we tell." And as the sun set over Ouagadougou, children playing in the streets sang a song of hope they had never dared before, because now they had a leader who made them believe in tomorrow. In schools across West Africa, children repeated his words, their eyes bright with new dreams. In crowded markets, shopkeepers spoke of dignity, not despair. In towns and cities, people gathered to watch videos of that calm, powerful moment when Captain Ibrahim Traore stood tall before the world. But it wasn't just words, it was a promise that Africa's future belonged to Africans. Traore's voice became a beacon, a rising tide of hope that lifted even the heaviest hearts. Mothers whispered to their children, "You are strong." And somewhere in the quiet, a nation healed, not because problems vanished, but because a leader showed them they were not alone, that their story mattered, and that they could face tomorrow with courage. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Traore received an unexpected visitor, an old man from a remote village weathered by time and hardship. He carried a small, worn box. Inside, photos of a young Traore, a boy who once dreamed under the same stars as millions of African children. The man spoke softly. "You gave us hope when we thought all was lost." Traore felt a lump in his throat. He had not just spoken for his country, but for every forgotten face in Africa's vast landscape. That night, Traore sat quietly, thinking of every story, every tear, every smile that had shaped him, and he knew his fight was far from over. But now it was a fight shared by millions, a shared hope born from the courage to stand tall. The world had listened. The doubters were silenced. But more importantly, Africa had spoken through Traore's calm, razor-sharp words across the continent. Tears were shed. Tears of pain, yes, but also tears of pride and resilience in the faces of those who had suffered and struggled. A new light shone, a light fueled by dignity and unity. And as Traore looked toward the future, he knew that this moment, this powerful response, was only the beginning, because a continent awakened cannot be silenced. Now it was time for every voice to rise, every story to be told, every dream to be chased. And as you watch this story unfold, remember, this is not just history, it's a call to believe, to hope, to stand with Africa. If this story moved you, if it stirred your heart, please hit that like button. Your voice matters, just like Captain Trouts. Together we rise.